Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. I think it's Tuesday today, and I'm a little bit behind on releasing some videos. So this video is actually stuff that I did on Sunday afternoon, and then I've got a couple more that I'm trying to get edited before I go on my grocery trip. So we shop every 4 to 6 weeks. If you haven't been here before, we're coming up to trying to drag it out to 8 to 12 weeks, and this week is my shopping trip, and it's the last one before Christmas. So it is quite a complicated one that's requiring a lot of planning and a lot of thought and a lot of just brain power that I can't use on anything else at the moment. So we also got the food hamper on the weekend. If you want to check out the video, I'll try and remember to put it in the cards or something. And in that hamper we got a whole lot of chilies and tomatoes and things like that that need to be processed before I go on my trip, because otherwise I'm away for 3 days and then I come back with all the fresh veggies and stuff, and it's just too hard. So I'm trying to work through that. So today I started work on in this video I started work on the chilies and stuff like that. I'm going to share that and start the process, but it's not quite finished yet, so I've got more to share with you after that as well. And I'm trying to get my planning done today for the trip, because I need to leave fairly early tomorrow. I'm taking the trailer with me so that I can do a big stock up, but also I'm trying to find some secondhand bunk beds for the kids, and I managed to find a shower base that we're going to replace the bathtub with in the bathroom when we redo the bathroom. So I managed to find a secondhand one of those for $50. And what else am I on the lookout for? I want some 44-gallon drums and things like that. So it's just going to be a really, really busy trip. So I'm trying to get everything planned as much as possible beforehand and make sure that I don't forget anything towards Christmas baking and cooking that I want to do, because it's not like I can just duck out and get it. There is an RGA and a Foodworks about half an hour away, and we can grab some miscellaneous items from there when needed. We do buy milk from there throughout the 6 weeks. Not that we drink a whole lot of milk, but we do make milk kefir. And that's sort of all we buy. Occasionally we buy some carrots or potatoes or a bag of apples if we're really short on fruit or something, but generally speaking we buy milk. But they do have a scope of things that we can grab if we're desperate. It's all just a little bit more expensive than I pay on my trip to go and grab it. So I try very hard to get everything, because much like anyone else, if you go into a shop to buy food, you can walk out with $50 worth instead of just the item that you want to. So we try and avoid going to them as much as possible to stay within our budget and eat what we've got at home and not buy extras, because realistically we don't need them. Anyway, I just squirreled again. For everyone who's with me all the time, I do that fairly often. So I'll bring you along in the kitchen today, so enjoy this, and then I'll just talk you through what I'm doing and talk you through the plans for the rest of it as well. And I'll get this video up today, and then I will try and get the next few scheduled for while I'm on my shopping trip as well. And I will try and take the camera with me, my phone with me, when I'm doing some of my Christmas shopping, but again, I can't guarantee it. I feel really self-conscious with a camera in a shop, so we'll see how we go. But anyway, check out what I got done, and I'll see you next time. So I started off with the tomatoes. So the tomatoes were a little bit squishy. There was a couple that weren't real great, and some of them had some real bad scarring on the skin of them, but they're all very edible. So what I do is I roast my tomatoes. I find that it's the best way to make them something you can use in a myriad of ways if you roast them and then go from there. So I tend to roast, so even when my garden's doing well, which is not this year, but last year when my garden was doing really well, I would get to a point where I had 2 trays full of tomatoes, so I would just roast them all, and I would just can them as roasted tomatoes, because that way I've just got these jars of canned roasted tomatoes that I can then tip out puree for anything I want. We have run out of pizza sauce, so that's what these slot will probably be turned into, rather than canning as roasted tomatoes, because we have no pizza sauce left on the shelf, but we do have plenty of pasta sauce, and I still do have a few jars of roasted tomatoes from last season on the shelf as well. And we always have a little bit of a stockpile of bought tinned tomatoes and passata and things like that too. So for this, I make this into pizza sauce. It's one of the things that you can use not a huge amount of tomatoes to get a decent amount for, because you only use a small jar per pizza night. So what I do is I cut up all the tomatoes. I just chunk them up, I cut any bad bits off, and I tend to cut the cores out, but I don't skin them, I don't de-seed them or anything like that, because all of that can be pureed up, especially because I've got the Thermomix. It purees up really, really fine, and it's negligible, especially as pizza sauce, because you're not having spoonfuls of it, so you don't see those little slivers of skin in them either. So I just chunk them all up and I put them in the tray. I put a whole onion and a couple of cloves of garlic in per one of these Classica cast iron roasting pans, but you don't want the onion or the garlic exposed to the top too much, because as the tray cooks, the stuff on the top is what gets that little bit of browning and charcoal, which you want, but you don't want burnt onion or garlic, because that just makes it a little bit bitter. So you want the tomato to brown, but not necessarily the onion or the garlic. So I like to tuck them underneath the tomatoes and make sure that it's tomatoes on top, preferably with the skin facing up on the top of the tray, because that's what you want to brown, that skin on the top of the tomatoes. I drizzle it with a little bit of olive oil just to help with that browning as well, and I put them in the barbecue. So I did 2 full trays worth out of the tomatoes that I found, whole onion in each, a couple of cloves of garlic in each. These were the cloves that I pulled out of the garden, so peeling them is not a whole lot of fun, but homegrown garlic, you're not going to say no to that. And then I put them in the barbecue. They take a various amount of time. They can take 50 to 60 minutes sometimes, because you don't want to pump the temperature up too high, because you don't want to burn it. You just want to get a little bit of that browning on the top of the tomato while cooking some of the juices out. So it's probably 40 to 60 minutes, but it could be up to 90 minutes depending on how densely you've packed the trays, how dense the tomatoes are, and all that sort of thing. So you really have to just do it a little bit by eye. And I try and cook it on only about 180, sometimes a little bit less depending on what I'm doing. Like if I'm using a cookie sheet where they're flat, I would do it on a lower temperature. In these baking trays, you can kick the temperature up a little bit because there's enough mass in the tray to stop it from burning as badly. But I did 2 trays full in the barbecue, ready to go for today. So that was the first task of the morning. While they were cooking, I pulled the mustards out. So I made the mustards the other day. I'll try and remember to link the video. I made the mustards the other day, and so they've been sitting around waiting for me to get back to them. The whole grain mustard is the one that I started with first. Now, they have a lot of excess liquid when you look at them. They do thicken up a lot though. So what I tend to do is I strain some of the liquid off, but I keep it. And then I like to blend or turbo the mustard seeds a little bit, because you break them up a little bit for texture, but it also helps with emulsion of the mustard and the thickening of the mustard. So I like to crack the seeds a little bit and I have a TriBest personal blender. If I do a really big batch, I use the Thermomix, but in a small batch, it's not enough liquid in the Thermomix for it to do it well. So I like these personal blenders for that. So you're going to crack the seeds, and then you're just going to put it back in the jar and put it back in the fridge. It will look wet to start with, but it will thicken up in the fridge. But if it still ends up a bit thin once it's in the fridge, you can always just tip off a little bit of the excess brine if you want to, or you dig under it to get the heavier mustard and leave it in there as a top on it. Personal preference there, but it does look a lot more watery when you first do this than it will after sort of 24 hours in the fridge. Then I did the fermented one, and I did the same process with the fermented one. I left some seeds whole and cracked up the other seeds, because I want the texture of the whole seeds too. It is supposed to be sort of a whole grain mustard, but I want to crack some of the seeds so that it helps with that emulsion and that thickening agent as well. So I take most of it out, leave some of the whole seeds behind, and then mix it all through afterwards. And do remember that even though fermentation slows down when it's refrigerated, it doesn't necessarily stop. So having a lid that doesn't quite seal on this is probably a good idea. You can add some vinegar to it at this point to sort of halt the fermentation. I will see how it goes in the fridge and how quickly I use it over this Christmas period, because I'll use a fair bit over the next couple of weeks. The yellow mustard, again, is pretty much similar. It's made with mustard powder, not mustard seeds, so it's fairly thick and fairly smooth anyway, but I just gave it another blend through, made sure that, because I think I put garlic in there too, and chunks of garlic in there potentially, so I did another blend through on the TriBest blender and made sure that it was really, really smooth, so that there's no grit to it for when we have. So every shopping trip, if you've watched any of our shopping trips before, we have hot dogs for dinner. the night that I bring everything home. So we're going to use this on the hot dogs, which will be really nice. So I just blended it till it's smooth, put it in a jar, stuck it in the fridge. So those 3 are in separate jars in the fridge for me to access whenever I want. This is what the tomatoes look like when they come out of the barbecue. So you want that bit of browning and charcoaling on the tops of them, but not too much. You don't want to take it too far because then you'll have the wrong flavour, though you can peel them if you want to. The other task I had to start was the chilies. So these are the hot chilies. I've still got the jalapenos to deal with, but these are the hotter chilies or the mixed chilies. I'm not entirely sure what chilies they are. If someone knows, please feel free to let me know. And first thing I did was I sorted them. So it was a big grocery bag full of them. Some of the ones on the bottom had been squished and had spread out and gone a bit yuck. Some of them had the ends were going a bit yuck from being in the bag and the plastic and things like that. So I went through the whole bag first, sorted the ones that were in perfect pristine condition into a basket, the ones that needed to go to the chickens. You can feed chilies to chickens because chickens don't have heat receptors, so they don't feel the heat. Cannot feed them to the pigs or dogs or anything like that, but the chickens can eat them. So I sorted them out, and the really gross ones went to the chickens, and the ones that had a little bit of damage but were still usable were what I used first. So I used them first to cut up and pull away anything that needed to be discarded and kept what was fine. The first thing I decided to make was just a simple Sambal Oelek. Now, I have no idea if that's how it's pronounced. It's Sambaloelek. I'll put it up on the screen. I buy this from Asian stores because I use it in my dal. I use a spoonful of it in the curry base for my dal. So I thought, well, I'll make my own, and then that way I don't have to buy it. And it's basically just chilies minced up, and then some rice vinegar, salt, and garlic is optional. So I roughly chopped up the chilies, and I did a mix of them, and then I weighed them so that I knew how much I was using, because I'm following a recipe here because I've never made it before, and all the recipes were very similar in weight to salt to vinegar ratio. So I chopped them all up into pieces and weighed them, and then I put them in the Thermomix to mince up. So basically you want a paste. It's basically a paste. You want to let out all its natural juices and things like that as well, so that's going to cover it when it's in the fridge and things like that. It had, as said, some rice wine vinegar, salt, and some garlic in it, and it was all pureed up. And then I added a little lemon juice. It's supposed to be lime juice, but I didn't have any easy to grab, so then I just stuck it in a jar in the fridge. It theoretically lasts a really long time in the fridge because it's so acidic, but it is quite a large jar, and I only use a tablespoon at a time, so I may half the jar and put half of it in the freezer. I don't imagine it's going to affect the texture too much because it gets cooked when you use it anyway. And chilies, like I freeze chilies all the time to make cowboy candy and stuff, and whilst they end up a little bit mushy, they're perfectly serviceable for what I use them for, so I'd imagine that this will be the same. So I just put it in the jar in the fridge, but yeah, I might split this jar up and put some of it in the freezer because I'm just not real sure how quickly I'll get through it, and I don't want it to go bad. The next thing I did was I decided to do a jar of fermenting chilies, which I will use in a myriad of ways. I cut them into chunks and then split them and then put them into one of my fermenting jars. I packed it in really tight as I was going. I used the end of a clean, sterilised end of my rolling pin to do that. I do have a wooden tamp somewhere, and I cannot find it for the life of me. The kids have probably used it in the dirt or something. So I have this wooden rolling pin that works really well for that as well. Just have to remember to wash it quite well because this has had chili all over it, and then if I go to use it to roll out a dough or something, that's gonna, that might hurt. So I cut them into chunks and split them in half and packed them in the jar really nice and tight. There's still a lot of these chilies left, so you can do a ferment like this but with them minced up, which means you'd fit a lot more in a jar. So I might do that as well, because the fermented chilies can be used in so many ways. Like you can make srirachas and hot sauces and all sorts of things out of this fermented chili base. So I will probably just fill another big jar with these minced ones, and whatever's left might go in the freezer. I will have to see how much time I end up with getting it done. So the chilies go in the jar, and then you need to put a brine over them to ferment them. So you need a 2 to 3% salt brine over them. So you weigh out your water that you think is going to fit. I guessed around about a little under a pint, so one of these jam jars and a little bit more to fit into that jar around those chilies. And you need to weigh the water and then do a 2 to 3% brine, salt added to the, by weight. that just sort of went on a ramble, didn't it? So you weigh out your water, and then you work out what 2 to 3% of your water weight is, and you add that amount in salt. And then you've got a 2 to 3% brine mixture. You can go all the way up to about 5% if you're wanting to be a little bit safe on this sort of thing, but 2 to 3 is fine for this. You just need to keep an eye on it. So I weighed out my water and then the salt mixture for the water, and then poured that over the chilies. You want to make sure that all the chilies are covered, but you don't want to go right to the tip of the jar, because the chilies will release some juice, like when you're making sauerkraut and things like that, and you get the cabbage to release the juice. If I had sat there and mashed the chilies more and more, there would have been more juice that came out of them. But I, to be honest, was a little bit over it by this point. So I used the brine instead, but it does mean that that liquid level will increase as the chilies release their liquids as well. So you want to make sure you leave some headspace. I have these Kilner fermenting jars, and they come with these Kilner glass weights that fit right in the top of the jar, which are fantastic. So I put a glass weight on mine, and then it has a Kilner lid that has a one-way valve in the top for fermenting as well. So I use these for my garlic and honey and things like that, small batch fermenting. So they are, it's a wonderful set. I really enjoy using it. I do have some pickle pipes that work with mason jars as well, but I'm less likely to have mason jars empty. So whereas I keep these empty purposely for this purpose. So glass weight on there, and then the fermenting lid. Theoretically, you're supposed to put this somewhere nice and dark and cool-ish. Well, that's not real feasible for me. It just means that I need to watch the level of it and stick it in the fridge when I think it's really at that point to be done. Like it's a hard, you want it to be bubbly, you want it to ferment, but you don't necessarily want it to go kind of funky. And when heat, it is possible that it goes kind of funky. So I've still got a little bit of work to do there with the chilies, and I have to do the jalapenos too. I think what I'll do with the jalapenos, because that's what I'll turn into cowboy candy, because that's what we use the most. I think I might just mince them all up in the Thermomix like I was going to make cowboy candy, but then freeze them flat in Ziploc bags, and then I can do it after Christmas, because we only recently made some. So I have a whole batch of it on the shelf. I'm not running low, and I just don't have the time at the moment. I also had to order some new lids for my jars, so I may not have enough lids for jars even if I wanted to do it until they arrive. So I think that's what I'll do with the jalapenos, but I need to finish working on the rest of the hot chilies too, and make sure that none go to waste before I go away. I think that was all that needed working on. Other than that, we're getting through the rocket and the mesclun mix, but whatever we don't eat will go to the animals. The chickens adore it, and the sweet potatoes can be stored in a box for quite a while. So I'll make some more gnocchi up with that probably sometime in the next couple of weeks, because the kids really enjoy that, and so does Darryl. But other than that, I think that was all that needed a lot of work out of the hamper stuff, so I'm getting that done. So thank you for joining me again today. I will see you again probably tomorrow. I've got a few videos this week before I'll show you the groceries on Saturday, and we'll see how we go. Bye guys.